The immigrant community in the US is bracing for more widespread deportations. The Trump administration has set in motion a new rule. It will allow Immigrant and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE, to deport undocumented immigrants anywhere in the US who they believe have been in the country for less than 2 years, without having to give them their day in court. Previously, only immigrants detained within 100 miles of the border who had been in the country less than 2 weeks could be deported without legal proceedings.
It prevents someone from having their due process, or just at least having a right to be in front of an immigration judge and just plead their case of why they're in the U.S.
It's the latest in the administration's multi-pronged approach that's meant to deter migrants from crossing the border. Earlier this month, the third country rule was put in motion. Asylum seekers who pass through a third country en route to the US must first apply for refugee status in that country rather than the US border.
Nobody expected it. We all have been here a long time. I personally have been kidnapped, extorted. I have already come from third countries, spending large amounts of money. I'm with my family, my children. It's very unfair on behalf of the Trump administration.
But Trump says his crackdown is necessary, that resources along the border are being depleted and detention centres can't cope. He's also threatened Guatemala, saying if they don't comply with the third country asylum rule, they'll pay the price.
They're supposed to sign what's called a safe third. That's a good thing for us, okay? That's all I have to tell you. And they went back. So we're going to do either tariffs, or we're going to do a form of tax, or we're going to use our ban. You know, people don't realize we won the ban.
In the last month, it seems Trump's pressure on Latin American countries is working. There's been a decrease in migrants coming to the US-Mexican border. But immigration analysts say Trump's immigration policies won't be left unchallenged. While the latest push for deportations may ease pressure on detention centres, it will now be even harder for people to prove they're eligible to claim asylum in America. Sally Ihan, TRT World, Washington.
So how many people are staying in this room?
About 50 folks at least, yeah.
So you're out of room?
Yeah, if you were to come to Juarez a year ago, you would have maybe 50 migrants in one migrant shelter. Right now, there are 3,000 to 4,000. People are on the asylum list. They're going to be waiting at least 3 or 4 months before they even get that first initial interview with a CBP officer at the bridge. If they're an MPP, they've been basically sentenced to be here in Juarez a year, maybe more.
So for these families, what do they do for a year?
You know, when you're here in Ciudad Juarez, if you've been subject to MPP or remain in Mexico, you have no access to work, you have no access to education, you have very little access to medical services if children are sick. You don't have the opportunity to find a lawyer necessarily. Almost nobody has a lawyer to negotiate the very complex system of asylum in the United States. And so these folks are completely dependent on charity, on the goodwill of folks here in Juarez. Juarez simply doesn't have the infrastructure to care for 8,000, 9,000 migrants who have been returned. And so a lot of them are going to fall off the page. They're going to be on the margins. They're not going to be, these are the lucky ones. These are the folks who have found safety, who have found refuge. There are thousands of people.
What is the unlucky people, what does that look like?
They'll either be forced to go back to their home countries, where they'll go back to very vulnerable, desperate conditions, or they'll get funneled into organized crime. We've seen situations of rape, we've seen situations of kidnapping here. This shelter, for example, has been broken into and folks have been attacked. There have even been homicides of Honduran migrants here in Ciudad Juarez. And so what Remain in Mexico is effectively doing is creating a vulnerable population, a pool of migrants who can be victims of organized crime, who can, are subject to conditions where in a city where crime is on the rise, homicides are on the rise, and every day is a precarious existence.
If we take the Trump administration as the start of the change in immigration policies in the U.S., and you take MPP as the marker, how much worse has it gotten for people since MPP?
A lot. So what we've effectively done is double down on one policy, which is deterrence. And it has two faces. One, we're criminalizing migrants. So what before was legal asylum, the ability to come to the United States, make your case in front of a judge, the Trump administration is criminalizing asylum seekers and making it more and more difficult for them to do that. And that's legal. To do that is legal. And that's what we have here in Juarez right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
The White House may be weighing a travel ban on Guatemala in wake of a failed agreement regarding asylum between the two countries. According to NPR, this is one of 3 options being considered by administration officials. The White House is also looking into imposing a remittance tax on foreign nationals who send money back to Guatemala, or even tariffs. This follows threats by President Trump after Guatemala had backed out of a deal and indicated his administration may hold them accountable. Other reports show countries who have been placed on the U.S.'s travel ban list have stopped nearly all legal migration to the country, highlighting the ban's effectiveness. Meantime, One America's Jacob DeMille has details on how Mexico's new hardline policies are impacting Guatemalans considering seeking asylum in the U.S.
Some Central American migrants appear to be reconsidering their trek to the U.S. southern border as Mexico continues its fight against illegal migration. Speaking with reporters this week, a number of migrants in Mexico's southern state of Chiapas say they're reneging their plans to seek asylum in the U.S. This in response to Mexico's recent change in its migration policies.
It's bad because shelters are full and we don't have permission to cross north. And authorities say there is no work because we don't have a document to work. There are companions of mine who've been there at shelters for days, and they don't have anything.
This comes as reports this week show Mexico has stationed nearly 22,000 National Guard troops on its northern and southern borders to mitigate the crisis. Additionally, Mexico said on Monday, close to 15,000 soldiers and National Guardsmen have been assigned to the northern border in order to ensure illegal migrants don't reach the U.S. This, as President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy has sent over 5,000 asylum seekers back to Mexico to await their hearings in recent weeks. As a result, Mexican border cities have faced problems sheltering the influx of new asylum seekers, which, in turn, appears to be prompting at least some migrants to think twice before making the journey.
My goal now is not to go to the United States. My goal is to get my documents and stay working here. Because to go off north is a lot of time, it's more complicated, anything can happen.
Meantime, President Trump has vowed to take a hard stance against Guatemala for withdrawing on the Safe Third Country Agreement.
We're looking at something very severe with respect to Guatemala. I've already cut all payments. I did that a year ago. I cut all payments going to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. We used to send them $500 million for nothing. For nothing. They didn't do anything except set up caravans. So Guatemala, we're going to take care of, and it won't even be tough. We're looking at a couple of different things. One of the things very heavy is, as you know, Mexico has put 6,000 people on that border.
Earlier this month, Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales canceled his trip to Washington amid U.S. pressure to ratify the deal. While Morales was expected to sign the agreement, he was reportedly blocked from doing so by the country's high court unless he gained congressional approval. President Trump may be considering implementing a retaliatory travel ban to the Central American nation in the near future. Jacob DeMille, One America News.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube. And call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.
Two people jump from a car and make a dash for the US border. Nearby, 2 Mexican National Guards patrol the area. Within seconds, the 2 migrants are in US territory. There is little the guards can do. The migrants will be picked up by US Border Patrol. But the flow of migrants into the US appears to have slowed in recent months, following new policies by the Trump administration. The Migrant Protection Protocols, or the Remain in Mexico policy, means migrants must stay in Mexico while their cases are adjudicated. Dilcia and her son Anthony left Honduras because of the violence there. Her husband and other twin son have already reached Houston, Texas. But having been separated on the journey, Dilcia and Anthony have been stuck in Juarez for months.
I miss my child and I miss my partner. And my son has been suffering for his brother because they are twins. I ask God to give me an opportunity to arrive and let me see my child.
Asylum seekers face a long wait. First, they are given a number, a system known as metering. The process starts when that number is called, but that can take weeks. Then, under the Remain in Mexico policy, asylum seekers can wait many months in Mexico before they are called to have their cases heard by a judge. Michael is a former soldier that left Honduras with his 4 children. They have their papers and are now awaiting a court date.
I hope they don't send us back, because the truth is that we come from a very dangerous area, and if they send us back, it's like sending us to our deaths.
This hostel was originally set up to help abused and vulnerable women and children from the Juarez area. The shelter accepted its first migrants just over 4 months ago. It now houses some 240. Ismael Martinez runs the shelter. He's already preparing for more arrivals.
Thousands and thousands are going to stay here in Mexico. There's not another option to go back to their country. Why would they go back? They don't have food. They don't have a home. Some of them don't have families. Why would they go back?
Since the Remain in Mexico program began in January, some 20,000 migrants have been sent back to Mexico. Many of the shelters in Juarez are now stretched to capacity.
Remain in Mexico essentially asks Mexico to meet their international obligations while we get to not meet ours.
Along the border, a group of migrants huddle next to an emergency gate at the wall. They hope a US border patrol will soon pick them up. For many, that will begin another journey, back across a border they risked so much to cross. Dan Williams, CGTN, Ciudad Juarez, Mexico.
Well, my next guest says President Trump will act to secure our border and will not bow to the radical Dems' inaction and opposition. Joining us tonight, Congressman Matt Gaetz, member of the House Judiciary and Armed Services Committees. Great to see you, Congressman. First of all, the news that the Mexican government, President López Obrador, has ordered 15,000 of his troops to the northern border, the U.S.-Mexico border, to take responsibility in securing that border. I think that is extraordinary achievement.
Well, Mexico knows that the Trump administration means business. And frankly, it's been past time for Mexico to stop acting like a turnstile for the human traffickers rolling out of Central and South America and then up into the United States. What we have learned through this experience is that when the president engages his full deal-making capabilities, we can have the type of transformational change that will ultimately lead to a more secure border.
Yeah, you know, it's his leadership at work here. And it's unprecedented leadership. It's historic leadership. We're talking 2.5 years of his first term in office, and to think of what he's doing. This move with López Obrador, if these two men begin working as partners in their respective national security interests for Mexico and for the United States, this is going to be this is a tectonic achievement that will change Mexico and change the United States.
And Lou, you remember during the campaign when Democrats said, oh, if Donald Trump is elected, we'll never be able to make a deal with Mexico because he said all these things about Mexico. The reality is that Republicans and Democrats have been trying for more than 20 years to get an agreement like this, and it took someone with the skill and deft and I think sensitivity to what's really going on that Donald Trump brought to bear to ultimately get us across the finish line.
You know, the racists, in point of fact, are the radical Dems, who have chosen benign neglect of the responsibilities to help our southern neighbor achieve domination over the drug cartels, to end the cartels' influence along that border, which is costing, just in opiate deaths and overdose doses in this country, the lives of 70,000 Americans a year. Who are these radical Dems? Who is Nancy Pelosi and Charles Schumer to oppose this president?
Well, and now they're actually joined by those who believe that we should stop interior enforcement of our immigration laws.
Right.
The latest calls from the radical left in Congress would oppose deporting people who were caught, who got due process, who were deemed to have no valid asylum claim, who got a deportation order, and the radical Dems think that they ought to be able to stay in our country forever. With no consequence. There's no difference between the policies that they are advocating and having no borders at all. And that's why the work of interior enforcement, getting rid of the 1 million people in this country who have deportation orders, is absolutely essential to preserve the rule of law and to deter illegal border crossings going forward. If people can get an order by a court that they have to be deported and they stay anyway, it makes a joke of our entire immigration system, and it will result in even more people moving from the Northern Triangle into the United States. I mean, you look at the last 5 months alone, 1% of Honduras and 1% of Guatemala have moved into our country just in that short period of time.
And very quickly, Kevin McAleenan, the acting secretary of DHS, accused the Washington Examiner reporting 5 different sources saying that he was the source of the leak. I talked with McAleenan today.
I don't believe it.
He categorically denied that he was the source of those leaks. Your thoughts?
I absolutely believe Acting Secretary McAleenan, he has done a phenomenal job in putting together these deals, not only with Mexico, but deals that we're about to ink with Guatemala and Honduras to stop the flow of this invasion. McAleenan had dinner with me just nights before this reporting from the Washington Examiner, and he was going through the specific strategies that he wanted to use to be effective. There was no person more dedicated to making interior enforcement of our immigration laws successful than Acting Secretary McAleenan. I have total confidence in him, and I just don't believe these anonymous sources, Lou. This town is full of this anonymous source garbage, and frankly, a lot of times it's intended to distract us from the good work that's being done by the Trump administration.
Congressman, appreciate it. Congressman Matt Gaetz.